Today, we become legends.
Hey, my name's Inter, and welcome back to the channel for another banger. Today, we're going to be redoing the tier list on how toxic each god's mains are. You know, how likely are they to be toxic in the game if you see them pick this god. I made this video like 4 or 5 years ago or something like that, and a lot of new gods have been released since then, and opinions have shifted, gods have changed playstyle, all that kind of stuff, so I thought I would remake it. It was a fun video to do. And yeah, as I say, a lot has changed between, I think, 2020 when I made that video and 2024. So we got all the tiers here. At the top, we have Dodge the Lobby, which is like the ultimate most toxic players of any god in existence. You know, there's a solid like 80 to 90% chance this guy will be toxic in some kind of way. If they main this god, you should probably just dodge the lobby. We got likely toxic. You know, it's definitely likely that there'll be some kind of toxicity coming out of these players, but not necessarily always. And we got only toxic if you're losing. These are the type of players that, you know, if they're getting bodied or if your team's getting bodied, they're going to start being toxic. But if you're winning the game, they'll mostly be quiet. We got neutral. Not really anything either way. They're not particularly known for being untoxic, but they're not particularly toxic either. Unlikely toxic. These guys are, you know, they're not particularly going to be toxic, but maybe occasionally they will be. And then at the bottom, we've got actively prevents toxicity, which is those kind of players that, you know, actually try and get in the way of people being toxic and say, come on, guys, we can do it. We can win this one. Probably you'll find a lot of supports down here. But yeah, without further ado, let's just jump in with Hercules, who I think is a pretty neutral god, in my opinion. You could argue that he's only toxic if you're losing, but honestly, I say Hercules players, they're pretty neutral. They generally don't get involved in that kind of stuff. Agni, I'm going to put in only toxic if you're losing. He probably should be here, but the sole reason I'm putting him here is because I have personal anecdotal experience with quite a few Agni players that have been extremely toxic when they start losing in mid. Maybe that's just me, but I'm going to throw him there just because I've seen quite a few Agni players from the mid lane get extremely toxic if they don't win the early game. AMC will throw here as well. God with not very much mobility and often just blames his deaths on his team not protecting him enough, when it's like, bro, you picked AMC, you've got to have a little bit better positioning than running into the enemy backline. Apwash, what do we do with Apwash, dude? Honestly, I feel like Apwash could be all over the place. I've seen plenty of toxic Apwashes in my life, but I've also seen plenty of people just play him because they really enjoy playing him. I feel like it kind of depends a little bit on if he's meta or not. Honestly, I think with that said, we'll just throw him in neutral. Apwash can kind of be all over the map, dude. He absolutely can be toxic, but he absolutely can not be toxic as well. Amaterasu, I think I'll throw in unlikely toxic. I honestly don't see a lot of toxic hammer players in general. They kind of know their lane. They know what they're doing. They generally just aren't going to be completely BMing the teammates, blaming them for everything that goes wrong. Anher, I think I'll throw to neutral. I don't particularly see any Anhers being extremely BM towards their teammates, so he's generally pretty normal. Anubis. Okay, Anubis is a question of these top two tiers. Where are we putting him, dude? Where are we putting him? I think, honestly, I'm going to throw him and dodge the lobby. Anubis players, I don't know what it is, dude. It's usually in Smite, generally, that the bad players are the most toxic players, because they just look for anything else to blame and don't actually look inwards and, you know, try and improve their own gameplay. They just blame everyone else and then they stay bad. And, you know, stay mad, stay bad, stay bad, stay mad, however you want to put it. Anubis players are generally extremely toxic towards their teammates. It's got a little bit of that AMC vibe where, like, you've picked a god that has absolutely no mobility and is a glass cannon that relies on his team protecting him. And yes, your team should be protecting him, but also they just run into the enemy backline, feed their brains out, and then complain that their support didn't save them somehow. Yeah, Anubis players, I think, definitely a dodge the lobby type of pick. Ao Kuang, I think, is the perfect example of only toxic if you're losing. Generally, Ao Kuang players, they do their thing, but if they start losing or if they get behind in the early game because he's more of a late game pick, or if they like start getting beads their execute, they'll start blaming their whole team for not popping beads on cooldown. I feel like if you start losing, Ao Kuang players, they're very used to winning because this god's permanently OP in ranked and just absolutely farms on coordinated teams. They're so used to winning that if they start losing, they just absolutely blame everything on their team because it can never be their fault, right? It's a jungler. Moving on to Aphrodite. This is a very interesting one. You would think with her generally being a quite supportive character that you wouldn't find that many toxic Afro mains, but I think she is minimum up here. I do find the occasional Afro that just like plays their stuff, knows what they're doing, plays support, plays mid, plays whatever, but honestly I see more like Afro solo players that do what the Anubis does and like run into the enemy backline and actually don't even select a target with their kiss and then die. Sometimes they die with ult up and then they try and blame their team for it. Like honestly, I feel like Aphrodite, she either belongs here or here, but for the funny, I'm going to throw her up here. Apollo, I think will be our first likely toxic. I don't think he's quite at the top of the tier list, but I do find a lot of toxic Apollo players, not only in the way that they BM their teammates, but also in the way that the god is designed in terms of like, it's toxic to just split push and completely ignore your team. And that's what I find Apollo players do a lot. You know, he has that ult to get over to team fights if he is going to split push, but half the time they don't even use it, dude. They just keep split pushing down the whole lane and let you lose a 5v4 fight, and then they get fire giant, and and he complains that his team are bad. He's like, bro, I won lane. I took down all 2 towers and Phoenix in my lane. It doesn't matter that we lost our Titan for it because I wasn't in the fight. Dude, that's most Apollo players, I feel like. Arachne, I think we'll throw in likely toxic as well. I do find a lot of toxic Arachne mains. You could maybe argue it goes here, though. In fact, yeah, you know what? We'll move it down to only toxic if you're losing. I feel like Arachne is a very similar case to Arquang. Arachne is permanently underrated and very good at destroying uncoordinated teams. They're very used to winning random games in ranked, and when they start losing, they have a real hissy fit about it. Ares. So this might be a hot take. I think I'll throw Ares into unlikely toxic. It's not something you would expect with the way Ares is designed as this like aggressive support that can solo people. Normally, aggressive supports are the ones that are the most toxic because they just blame everything on their team while not peeling for them. But honestly, in my personal anecdotal experience, I don't find that many toxic Ares players. They generally just keep relatively quiet. Artemis will throw down here as well. I don't really find any toxic Artemis players, to be honest. Maybe the very occasional one, but I think unlikely toxic is the best place for her. Artio, a very toxic character, but honestly, the mains of Artio, I don't think they're really that bad. I'm going to throw her in neutral. I don't think I really have any strong feelings either way on the players of Artio. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're toxic, sometimes they're not. Athena's an interesting one. So normally, like based on standard Athena mains, I would put her in unlikely toxic, but because of how strong Athena has been for like the last like year or two in Smite, she's pretty much been permanently meta, or at least permanently very strong. You end up with a lot of people that are just playing Athena to play the meta, and they sometimes do end up quite toxic. So I think I might throw her up a tier into neutral, even though I think normally she might be down in unlikely toxic. Atlas, I think I have to throw down in actively prevents toxicity, dude. You would think this character would invoke some level of toxicity in its player base, but somehow it doesn't, dude. Every Atlas player I meet, or at least every good Atlas player, like every Atlas main that I meet, is just an absolute giga chad that like basically just puts the team on his back like he does the Astrolabe and just completely like farms everyone. In a certain way, I do find a lot of fatless players that just play like a giga chad and completely ignore their backline and let them die so that he can get some kills, and in a way that's toxic in itself, but I find like every Atlas player is like really there to sort of command the team and bring everyone together. That's kind of what I feel with Atlas mains. Awilix, I think I'll throw to unlikely toxic. There are the occasional Awilix players that completely bitch and moan that no one picked a knock up for them, but generally people don't actually do that with this character that much. They either wait to see if other people are picking knockups and then they play Awilix, or they just play Awilix regardless and just try and farm with her own knockup or like enemy jumps or whatever. You would think there would be more of them being toxic about people not playing knockup characters for them, but actually Awilix mains are less entitled than you'd think. Baba Yaga, I don't want to throw her down in the bottom tier, but honestly it's arguable she belongs there, but I'll throw her in unlikely toxic. I don't really see that many toxic Baba Yaga players, honestly. Bacchus, so he sort of has the Athena treatment in that he's been very strong for a long time now, and a lot of people are picking him up when they're not actually mains of the god, and that can generally increase the toxicity levels because it's just tryhards playing meta picks, and if they start losing, they cry their brains out. Which, actually, thinking about it, is probably where Bacchus lands. Only toxic if you're losing. If Bacchus isn't jumping into the enemy backline, soloing them with his aggressive support shenanigans, and he actually starts having to peel and they're starting to lose, that's when Bacchus mains start to get a little bit toxic, in my opinion. Bakasura, straight to the top, straight to dodge the lobby. Bakasura players are extremely toxic. Just like the character, the players, they just blame everything that goes wrong on everyone else. They just think they can jump into a 5-man ult, and then the fact that they die is their teammates' fault. Bakekujira, this god doesn't exist, dude. No one plays this god. He is so incredibly boring, and since they nerfed him, he's not meta anymore, so there's no reason to play him. I guess I'll throw him in neutral, but honestly, I haven't seen anyone play this character in the entirety of Year 11. I don't think that's an understatement. I'm pretty sure I've not seen this guy in the entirety of Year 11. Baron Samdi, I think I will throw in actively prevents toxicity. I don't think I've ever seen a toxic Baron, honestly. Like, maybe the occasional 1 or 2 over, like, my many years playing this game. I mean, about, what, like 5 or 6 years since Baron's release. Generally, I find them absolutely pleasant to be around. He often has, like, a lot of funny dance emotes. They spam be sure to grab some brew in the fountain. It's absolutely great. Bastet, I think, is only toxic if you're losing, in my opinion. Bastet players, they can definitely get pretty heated if they start losing the game 100%. Bologna, I think I'll throw to neutral. There's generally not that many toxic Bolognas, but she's not super known for being like an untoxic character, in my opinion. Cabrakan will throw to likely toxic. The weird thing with Cabrakan is there are also a lot of Giga Chad Cabrakan mains that just shut up and get the job done, which you'd think he'd put him in down neutral, but there are also a lot of Cabrakan mains that can get very toxic. I think it's something to do with the character, man. Something to do with these characters that just like run it down. They end up with toxic mains. Camazotz, I'll throw to neutral. A very toxic character to fight into, but the player base of this character, I think, generally just kind of like sit there, they be quiet, they get the job done. Cerberus, I'll throw in actively prevents. Cerberus, I have never met a bad Cerberus player, or not bad in terms of the game, but bad in terms of, you know, being toxic and BMing the whole team and blaming everything on them. Cerberus players are generally very chill, in my opinion. I think he belongs down here. Cernanos, something we haven't seen in a long time. He was meta for a while, but no one really plays him anymore. I'm not entirely sure where to put him, to be honest. I'll probably just drop him in neutral. Chak will throw to likely toxic. This is normally being toxic to the enemy team with Chak mains, though, and it's similar with Cabrakan, actually. Generally, Chak and Cabrakan mains, they aren't toxic to their own team. They just run around laugh spamming and one-shot one-shotting the enemy backline, which honestly is great for me when they're on my team. But yeah, it is a little bit toxic to the enemy team to just run around with a last spam macro spamming little girly man at the enemy backline as he blink on them. Changa will also throw to likely toxic. I don't know if it's the fact that she became meta recently and tons of people are picking her up or whatever, but I always find extremely toxic Changa mains. I don't really know what it is about this character that attracts them, but yeah, I definitely do find a lot of them start BMing the team if anything goes wrong. Charon, honestly similar to Atlas in my opinion. Charon players just get the job done. They're kind of like the Giga Chad, like team commander kind of type. And the team commander in a good way, not where they're trying to like backseat game their entire team and complaining about like the smallest mistake that they make. They just try and make the calls, they get in there, they get the job done. Charon mains, I don't think I found a bad one. Charybdis, this is an interesting one. I feel like it's a bit of a mixed bag, a bit like Apoash from earlier. You can definitely find some toxic Charybdis mains, like some really toxic Charybdis mains, but then you could also find people that just pick the character because they enjoy her and they get the job done. I think it's probably increased a little bit in terms of the amount of toxic, not really mains of her necessarily, but people that are playing her a lot because she became pretty good recently, where she's been bad for her entire life. And so generally, all Charybdis did was attract hardcore mains of the character that are just playing her for a lot of fun, and that generally results in a slightly less toxic player base than a meta character. So yeah, she's kind of all over the place. I think I'll throw her in neutral. Chernobog will throw into only toxic if you're losing, in my opinion. He's kind of like Apollo in that like he can get really annoying with the split pushes, but Chernobog's ult is much more team fighting oriented than Apollo's is. It's much quicker to get over to the fight, and he also gets like global slows on people and stuff like that, so you can have a lot bigger of an impact. And Chernobog players, generally they will give up the split push much more quickly than the Apollo players will give up the split push. And that's pretty much what I'm basing these two characters. Chiron, I think we'll throw in unlikely toxic. I generally don't find any toxic Chiron mains in general. Kronos. Kronos is an interesting one, dude. I think I want to throw him to likely toxic. I see a lot of toxic Kronos mains, dude. And it's a weird one because Kronos has been bad for a long time, almost a bit like Charybdis. Not as long as Charybdis has been bad, but he's been bad for a while, and you think that would generally attract like a fairly positive like main base for the character where they're just playing him because they enjoy him and they're not necessarily like try-harding their brains out. But honestly, I find a lot of Kronos players that just think they can 1v5 the entire game and they press 2 into the enemy backline, they die, and then they blame their team for it. Cleaner, I think we'll throw to neutral. A bit of a mixed bag for Cleaner in my opinion. Cthulhu. Cthulhu is an interesting one. This kind of character design I would think would attract some toxic players, but it generally seems not to. I think it's either unlikely toxic or actively prevents. Probably unlikely to be toxic. I would say Cthulhu mains are actively preventing toxicity, you know, trying to bring the team together or anything. They generally just keep quiet and get the job done. Cucullin, the character, he gets very angry. His players generally do not get too angry. I'll put him in neutral. I think Cucullin players are generally quite reasonable. Let's zoom this out a little bit. There we go. Cupid. Cupid. Where do we put Cupid, man? Honestly, I haven't seen anyone play this character in like 2 years. That's kind of the problem. I don't really have a lot of recent memories of like what Cupid players are like. I think I'll just throw him to neutral for now. I've had some bad experiences with Cupid players, some good experiences with Cupid players. It kind of depends. Daji, I feel like his textbook example of only toxic if you're losing, in my opinion. It feels like Daji players generally have that like jungle mindset to the extreme where they think they can 1v5 everyone and they're the best player on the planet to ever exist. And so generally if things start going wrong for them, it can't be their fault, it must be the team's fault. And so that generally ends up with what's happening with Daji. Danza, I feel like Danza players are generally quite in line with the character. They're just here for a little bit of fun to make a good laugh. Generally, Danza Burrow players are not quite very toxic in my opinion. Discordia, her literal ult makes people spam taunt, but other than that, I wouldn't say she's particularly toxic in terms of the main base of this character. Erlang Shen, I think I'm going to throw him into likely toxic for a very similar reason to Chak and Cabrakan. This character is kind of like a run it down character. He's obviously very OP at the moment, so probably a lot of people are playing him that aren't particularly mains of the character or anything. But I feel like he's a bit of a run it down. He's generally a jungler, and if he's not a jungler, he's a solo laner, which both those roles have hero complexes. So generally, Erlang Shen players, if things start going wrong, they start blaming their team real quick. But also, I generally see a lot of Erlang Shens like blinking in, one-shotting someone, and then absolutely spam taunting their way through the entire backline, so they've got that as well. ESET, we'll throw to neutral. ESET players don't even talk, dude. I feel like I've never seen an ESET player actually send a chat message in my entire life. Fafnir actively prevents toxicity, dude. Occasionally you will see a Fafnir like spam taunting in dragon form running through the team, a bit like Shaq and Cabrakan up here. But I feel like that's generally less so, and most Fafnir players, they're playing to be the true support, you know, buffing up their team, team commander, that kind of thing. Fenrir, I think we'll throw to likely toxic. It's another one of those jungler complex things. Generally Fenrir players, especially if they're playing in support. Fenrir supports are probably up here, dude. Like, honestly, every Fenrir support I've ever seen is toxic, I swear. Freya will throw a dodge the lobby, I think. She could arguably be down here. Maybe it's my bias at the moment because she's so strong, but I see so many toxic Freya players that think they're the best thing since sliced bread, and they're actually garbage at the game. You know, she's safer than you'd think, but she's not like the most safe ADC in the world, and she does take a while to get online, and people feed their brains out in the early game and then blame their support for it a lot of the time. And honestly, if you're losing on this pick right now, you have no right to call your team bad. So yeah. Ganesha, probably the definition of actively prevents toxicity. High-toxicity, unless you're genetics. If you're genetics, it's straight up here, but if you're any other Ganesha main, actively prevents toxicity, dude. If you're inbound, if you're anyone else, like, this character is basically the most wholesome support that exists. Geb is very similar, but I will throw him to unlikely toxic because there is that occasional Geb main, especially the ones that go full damage, they get extremely toxic. Gilgamesh. Do I have a strong opinion on Gilgamesh mains? I don't think I do, you know. I do see them occasionally doing a bit of last spam on the enemy team, bit of taunt spam when they like drop kick him into a wall and one-shot him. But generally, I would say they're pretty neutral. I don't really have a strong opinion either way on Gilgamesh mains. Guan Yu will throw to unlikely toxic. Guan Yu players a bit like ESET players. I don't think I ever see Guan Yu players even send a chat message, dude. They just kind of sit there and they play the game. Hachiman will throw to neutral. If this was like way back when Hachiman was like completely dominating the meta, like I think it was end of year 10, start of year 11, it would probably be a little bit higher up because you had a lot of people just meta slaving him. But generally now it's come back to like it's mostly Hachiman mains or people that enjoy the character playing him, and I think that's come down a little bit. Hades will throw to likely toxic. You could argue Hades is the definition of only toxic if you're losing, in my opinion, but I feel like putting him down there is a disservice to the amount of Hades mains that I find that are toxic. Any of you that play on EU and have met crazy Hades, that's a hilarious one. He's terrible at the game. He only knows how to play Hades. He doesn't know how to play the actual game, and then he just blames his whole team for what's going on. And I feel like that's generally emblematic of every single Hades player. But also, he could fit here as well, because generally Hades, he completely stomps lane, and if he does not win the game off of that, he gets very, very angry at his teammates for it. Hebo, I think I'll throw to likely toxic for similar reasons to Hades. Heimdall, where are we putting Heimdall? I feel like generally I don't see very toxic Heim players, dude. I think I'll throw him into unlikely. Hell. Much like Afro, you would expect this kind of healer support character to generally breed non-toxic mains, but for some reason it doesn't, dude. I don't think she's quite as bad as Afro mains. Afro mains are definitely worse, but for very similar reasons, I think Hell goes to likely toxic. I mean, I guess they have some kind of reason to BM their teammates if they're juking their heals all the time. That's a very common complaint from Hell players, you know, just stand still for 1 fucking second so I can hit my light stance 1 on you. But other than that, generally I find that Hell players blame their team very quickly, especially if they're mid-Hell players. Support Hell players aren't as bad in my opinion, but mid-Hell players, especially solo Hell players, are really bad for this. Hera will throw to only toxic if you're losing. I feel like there definitely are some Hera players that as soon as they, you know, start losing the mid lane, I've definitely seen this many times in the past where they just start getting very antsy, blaming their jungler, blaming their support, blaming whoever they can find. Hercules, I think, goes to likely toxic for the exact same reason as Kabrakan and Shaq. This guy, generally, Hercules mains aren't going to get toxic at their own team. They're going to get toxic at the enemy team. Yeah, they're going to 2-1 boulder, kill someone, and then start dancing and spam taunting on them. But I feel like that's the reason he's up here. I'll zoom out a little more. Horus. Horus is a very interesting one, dude. Because Horus, I feel like he wants to be down here, but then I also do find the occasional toxic Horus main that I feel like he maybe should be in a similar place to Geb. Like, generally, this character's mains aren't very toxic, but you do find the occasional one that, like, kind of think they're the god in the support role and they're gonna one-shot everyone with his 2-1, you know, his, like, aggressive base kit. Hu Yi, I would generally throw in unlikely toxic, but similar to, who was it earlier on this tier list? Agni, I think it was. I found, like, the very occasional Hu Yi player that is extremely toxic. Like, some of the most toxic players I've ever seen in this game are Hu Yi players, but unfortunately, they're few and far between, so I think he belongs in neutral. Because, you know, if I've met, like, 200 Hu Yi players, it's been, like, 3 of them, but they were so damn toxic that I have to bump him up a tier for it, dude. There's some absolutely vile Hu Yi players out there. Can't remember the guy's name, but I've queued into him a few times where he plays ADC, he builds Griffin Wing earrings, first item, he loses the lane every single time, goes like 0-7 and starts blaming the team and then DCs. He's done that about 3 times in my games. So yeah, this is a bit of personal experience, but I have to bump him up a tier for that. Hunbats, I think we'll throw to unlikely toxic. I generally don't find very many toxic Hunbats mains in my opinion. Ishtar, no one plays this character anymore, dude. I feel like they should. I feel like Ishtar is good right now, but I really don't see it very much. I think I'll just throw it to neutral. No opinion, really, on Ishtar. Ishel, I think we'll throw to neutral. Generally, she's not that toxic, but I think, honestly, she probably belongs up here, mainly because she's kind of become meta a little bit recently, and that generally attracts a flock of meta slaves that are quite toxic. Izanami, I think we'll throw to likely toxic. Generally, a lot of Izanami players, she gravitates bad players towards her because you can easily win the lane for free, and it kind of makes up for the fact that you're actually terrible at being able to hit auto attacks. And I feel like those kind of players that are attracted to Izanami, they tend to blame their team for everything that goes wrong. Janus, unfortunately, I love my boy Janus, but he has to go to dodge the lobby. There's so many toxic Janus players out there that literally think they're Son Goku and can just like 1v5 the enemy team with a fat ult through the wall. And then they waste their ult, they portal through it, they get instantly stunned and die, and then they blame their team for it. There's many a toxic Giannis player that I could point out to you. Jingwei. Jingwei just makes me think of Barracuda, dude, which makes me want to put her very low on this list. But honestly, I think in general, most Jingwei mains are pretty chill. I'd put them in unlikely toxic. Yom, I think, will go to unlikely as well. He's a bit like Geb and a bit like Horus and Guan Yu, where there is the occasional Yom that, like, really starts, especially towards the enemy team, I feel like with Yom, starts, like, spam taunting and running through, like, while he's submerged and stuff like that. So there are the occasional with Yom, but I feel like most of them are generally quite fine. Kali goes straight to dodge the lobby. It's very similar to Giannis, a little bit similar to Bakasura and Freya as well. They just think they can 1v5 the whole enemy team. They dive in, they die, and then they blame their team for it. Biggest hero complexes in existence are generally from Kali mains. Kepri actively prevents toxicity, very similar to Ganesh. This guy is like the true support, and he's generally trying to bring the team together. He generally pops a little smiley face in chat when he saves you with his ult. We love Kepri players here. King Arthur, again, as much as I love my boy, I think we have to throw into likely toxic. There's a lot of toxic King Arthur mains out there. I've been one for a while. Generally, I'm not toxic to my own team. I'm like Kabrak and a Jack or whatever. I'm like running through the enemy team while I'm spinning, spam taunting them, and then like spam laughing while I ult them into the sky. I feel like this character just breeds toxic players, dude. Kukulkan, I'll throw to unlikely toxic. Generally, Kukulkan players, they're very silent. They just sit there, they get the job done. Especially since he's fallen out of the meta a lot recently. He was meta for a while, and that generally bumped him up a little bit, but generally it's mostly Kukulkan mains that are playing him now, and they generally keep quite quiet. Kumbhakana has to go to likely toxic. It's a toxic character design, and it attracts toxic players. On both sides of the coin, honestly. I see a lot of Kumbhakanas blaming their team, and I also see a lot of Kumbhakanas running through the enemy team, spam taunting and slash-R'ing them. Kuzenbo, we have to go to dodge the lobby. Don't dodge the lobby, because Kuzenbo players being toxic is damn hilarious in my opinion, but every single Kuzenbo player in existence is toxic, I feel like. I don't think I've met a single Kuzenbo that isn't toxic in some way, you know, be it to his team, be it to spam taunting while he washing machines through the enemy backline. It's a troll character. It's designed as a troll character, and people troll with it, and generally that leads to a lot of toxicity. He's definitely one of the higher ones up here. Lancelot, this feels like an only toxic if you're losing kind of character to me. Very similar to Daji and Bastet, these kind of junglers, Alquang and Arachne as well. Loki, of course, we have to throw Loki to dodge the lobby. The only one that probably contests Kuzenbo and maybe Kali in terms of these ones where, like, you actually genuinely might think about dodging the lobby. It's Loki. He's one of the most toxic designs Smite has ever had. Even after his rework, he can get a little bit toxic, though I think he's nowhere near as bad. But of course, he's legendary within the Smite community for his player base being toxic. They will just split push. They will ignore the entire team fight if anything goes slightly wrong in the game. They'll AFK. They'll BM their team. They'll slash out the enemy team, calling them bad even though he's down 0-5 in the laning phase. Like, they'll do everything they possibly can to make the experience of Smite worse. My man Brigitte. No one plays this character, honestly, which is kind of crazy because I think she's great right now, but no one plays her. I think I'll just throw it to neutral. I don't really have a strong opinion either way on my man. Matikaras. I think I will throw to... Where do we put Marty, dude? Release Marty was, like, up here for sure, but I feel like generally, as he's been nerfed a lot, people have sort of gravitated towards him as a main character now instead of just playing him for the meta. And I feel like that has reduced his levels of toxicity in the player base a little bit. Maybe we'll move him down here for that reason. Maui. Look at that Facebook grin, dude. Look at that Facebook looking ass grin. I think we'll throw him to unlikely toxic for very similar reasons to Jormungandr and Horus and Geb and a lot of these support picks. And honestly, the main reason he's not down here is genetics, dude. Genetics is known for this character. Genetics is also known for being an incredibly toxic player. I think it's hilarious, personally. He just does that Facebook Maui grin at people while he completely fucks them in the ass. I think it's great, but yeah, there are the occasional toxic Maui men that take after genetics, and they kind of bump him up from the lower tier. Medusa, I think I will throw to neutral. She has been meta recently, and it has attracted a lot of meta slave ADC mains that they just think they can pick her and get free wins, and then when they don't get the free wins, they get very sad about it and start blaming their team, but I think in general, she's not that bad. Mercury will throw to only toxic if you're losing. Mercury players, they need that late game. If they start losing the early game, they'll get very mad at their teammates for not carrying them through it. Mercury players also very well known for, like, ulting in, one-shotting someone with the crit and then last spamming. Merlin, very much a mixed bag for Merlin. I feel like I find some very toxic Merlin players, and then some of the most chill players I've ever seen also playing Merlin, so I think we'll throw him in neutral. Morgan, likely toxic. I find every single Morgan player in existence almost is toxic. There are a few that aren't, which is why she's not quite in the top tier, but I do find a lot of toxic Morgan players. Mulan, only if you're losing, I think. She's got an extremely strong early game, and then you get to team fights, and she starts feeding her brains out, and then wonders what's happening, and then starts blaming her team for it. Naja, probably the same tier, in my opinion, again. Very similar reasons to Mercury and Lancelot, a lot of these junglers that are up here. Neath. So the average Neath player has about 3 brain cells and has no idea what planet they're on. So in general, I would go like unlikely toxic with this. You do find the occasional Neath main that actually knows what they're doing, and for some reason the fact that they know what they're doing makes them worse. But generally a lot of Neath players you find, they've just played the tutorial and they don't even know what they're doing. They're just kind of like Maui Facebook grinning at the screen, really not knowing what's happening, so generally they're not that toxic. I don't think they know that a chat function exists in this game. Nemesis, I think we'll throw to unlikely toxic. She's one of the less toxic junglers. Jungling in general is one of the most toxic roles in the game. They have the biggest hero complex. But Nemesis, I feel like Nemesis players, they generally just get the job done, dude. I don't really feel like Nem players are that bad. Nike will throw to likely toxic. I find a lot of toxic Nike players both towards the enemy team in terms of emote spam and stuff like that, and also towards their own team. Nox, I will actually throw to likely toxic. The character design itself is one of the most toxic in the game, but the mains aren't quite as bad as what is up here, in my opinion. Nuwa, another toxic character design, but the Nuwa mains honestly aren't that bad. Then again, dude, you find a very occasional Nuwa player that is like the worst human being you've ever met. I think we'll drop them here for that reason. Most Nuwa players are actually kind of fine. They're honestly a little bit similar to me. Sometimes they don't even know what planet they're on. They don't even type in chat or use VGS or anything. But the occasional Nuwa player that I find that is like the actual like worst piece of filth I've ever seen, spamming obscenities in chat, I feel like that has to drag her up a little bit. Nuts, again, no one plays this character, dude. People played her on release and now no one plays her anymore. I think we'll just throw her to neutral for that reason. Odin, dude. Why do we put Odin? I think I'll throw him to neutral for similar reasons to a lot of the ones that are in here, and that like there are some toxic Odin mains, but in general they're not too bad. Olarum will throw to unlikely. I generally don't find like any toxic Olarum players for the most part. Osiris, a bit like Odin, you find the occasional very toxic Osiris player, but for the most part they're generally okay. Pele, I think same. Honestly, Pele probably goes to neutral for very similar reasons. Persephone, I think we'll throw to likely toxic, mainly because of the revert Persephone movement, right? They are some of the most toxic people in existence. In some ways, they're right. I do think the rework was generally a bit of a bastardization of the character, but the way they go about it, dude, they are some of the most toxic people on the planet. And even just in general, the players of Persephone, I generally find are quite toxic. Poseidon will throw up here as well. Poseidon players are generally the first ones to start blaming their team if they miss every single Kraken. Ra, where do we put Ra, dude? Oh, this is an interesting one. I really want to put Ra, like, all the way down here, but the problem is you do find a lot of Ra mids that last spam insane amounts. But the thing is, I feel like it's just because Ra has a great last spam, dude. They're not necessarily trying to be toxic with it. I think I'll still throw him down here. Might be a hot take with the amount of last spam that comes out of this character, but I think I do want to put him down here. Raijin, we'll just throw to neutral. Raijin players generally don't speak all too much. Rama, neutral as well, I think. Not really anything too much to say about Rama mains, I wouldn't say. They generally do have a little bit of a hero complex, especially if they hit one of those big fat triple snipes and they think they're on top of the world and they run into 1v5 and die. But generally, Rama players aren't too bad. Rats, I will actually throw to unlikely toxic. I generally don't find any rat mains that are particularly bad. Raven, we'll throw to neutral. I feel like it is only a few specific Raven mains. Generally, they're mostly fine. Scylla, same actually. Scylla, there's a very occasional Scylla main that is just off the wall unhinged, but for the most part, they're fine. Circuit definitely goes up to likely toxic though. Circuit, generally, I feel like there's a very good chance when you queue into a Circuit that she's going to be slash-Ring you obscenities. Set, very similar. Actually, maybe Set is only toxic if you're losing. I feel like that's what Set is, actually. Again, with Set players, they're very used to winning. Their characters are permanently OP, but no one realizes it and it never gets banned, and so they're just used to picking this and getting free wins. And as soon as that doesn't happen, they're the first to blame their team. Shiva players don't exist, dude. Shiva players just do not exist, so I guess I'll put unlikely toxic. Skadi, is she likely toxic or is she dodged the lobby? I feel like she's only likely toxic. I do find some Skadi mains that aren't that bad, but I do feel like a lot of them are extremely toxic. Sobek will throw to neutral. He's generally, I would feel, one of the more toxic support gods. You know, sometimes they'll go in, they'll miss their pluck, and then they'll blame their team for the fact that they didn't follow up on a pluck that missed, and stuff like that. But generally, they're not too bad. Most Sobek players are okay. Sol will do neutral as well. Again, there could be an occasional toxic Sol ADC main or whatever, but they're not too bad. Wukong will throw to unlikely. I don't think Wukong players are that bad in general. I feel like most of them are okay. Surtur, no one plays this character. Are the mains that do play him toxic, though? Honestly, I haven't seen one in so long, dude. It's like a rare species finding a Surtur main. We'll throw him into unlikely for now. Susano, straight up to dodge the lobby. Susano players. Honestly, I was saying Kali is like the crystallized example of a toxic, like, hero complex jungler, but honestly, I feel like that is Susano now that we've got to him. Sometimes it's justified. Some Susano players you see, they're absolutely cracked and they just run through whole teams, but sometimes they're absolutely not and they feed their brains out and then blame the team for it. Sylvanas, I think I'll throw to actively prevents toxicity with this guy, dude. I feel like Sylvanas players are always the most chill, even when they're not using the Bob Ross skin. Terra is mostly the same, honestly. I think Terra feels like generally a team commander kind of character that is very chill. Thanatos will throw to likely toxic. You could also argue only toxic if losing. I feel like that fits him quite well too. And in fact, maybe that is where we'll put him. Thanatos, again, he's an early game dominator. Generally, if you start losing the early game of Thanatos, you're looking for anyone to blame. Morrigan, I think I'll throw to neutral. There's some good, there's some bad with Morrigan mains. There's some, I feel like it generally depends on like how they play the character. You know, if they're generally really good at Morrigan, I feel like they're less toxic. But the guys that are terrible at Morrigan that don't really know their transform seem to be worse, in my opinion. I don't know what it is about that. Thor, we'll throw to likely toxic. I hate to put my boy here. I love Thor, but generally I feel like Thor players can get real toxic if they start losing. Thoth will throw to neutral. Bit of a mixed bag on Thoth. Sometimes you find them, sometimes you don't. Tiamat, unlikely toxic. I don't think I've ever seen toxic Tiamat player. I think they generally don't belong down here. I don't think they're actively preventing toxicity or anything like that, but generally I feel like Tiamat players are the most chill. They probably don't have any brain cells left with managing 12 different abilities. They don't have any brain cells physically left to open up the chat menu and type toxic messages, so that's probably the reason. Tsukuyomi, likely toxic, dude. Tsukuyomi, you don't see him very often nowadays. You saw him a lot at his release, obviously, with him being ridiculously OP, but you don't see him a lot now. But I feel like when I do see him, there's a very high likelihood that he's being toxic to the team. Tia, straight up to dodge the lobby, dude. Tia, one of the most toxic characters, one of the most toxic player bases. You know, movement speed, Tia running around last spamming while no one can catch you. This character, he's a hype character, but he's also an extremely toxic character that attracts toxic mains. Ula, where does Ula go? He's either likely toxic or he's dodged the lobby. I don't think he quite belongs with all of the stuff that we got up here, so I throw him into likely toxic, but you do find a lot of very cancerous Ulamens. Vermano will throw up there as well. Even though he's not in the meta at the moment, he is still good in my opinion, but even though he's not in the meta at the moment, and he was for a while, when you do find the occasional people actually playing this character, they're generally pretty toxic. It's that kind of character where you'll just W key into the backline, press your roll, you don't somehow kill everyone, and then you'll just blame the team for it. Vulcan. So Vulcan, I do kind of want to put down here, but I think I'll put him in neutral purely because you do find that occasional Vulcan main that is just absolutely ridiculous. Xbalanque, I feel like Xbalanque players don't talk, dude. They also don't exist. No one's played this character in a while, but I feel like Xbalanque players generally aren't talking. They're just kind of sitting there and they're getting the job done. Jingchen, I think I'll throw to neutral. One of the more toxic guardians in terms of player base, in my opinion, especially the ones that go full damage from jungle. Yamoja, does she go down here? Yeah, I feel like she does, dude. She has that kind of like team commander presence where a lot of the Yamoja mains are really there to kind of hold the team together and put them in the backpack and get everyone on good terms. And also similar to Tiamat, this character takes so much of a brain that they probably don't have any leftover brain cells to actually think of how many times they've fucked their teammates' moms. Ymir is an interesting one, dude. I feel like Ymir players are like the most happy, cuddly people on the planet, but also they do a lot of last spamming. They sometimes do a lot of walling off their own teammates for trolling purposes, so I think we have to throw him into like at least neutral. Yu Huang, very calm and calculated god, a very calm and calculated player base in my opinion. Generally, you're not hearing a lot of Yu Huang players BMing their team. Zeus definitely goes up to likely toxic though. Zeus is one of those characters, a bit like Anubis, a bit like AMC, where he is a glass cannon, no mobility, needs protection, and if he doesn't get that protection, Lord knows you'll never hear the end of it. And finally, Zhonghui. I think we'll throw to neutral. Zhonghui, generally you get a bit of a mixed bag with him, no pun intended. But yeah, there you go, boys. That is a full tier list on how toxic your main is. Let me know down below if you made any of these top characters, if you made any of these bottom characters. It should be very interesting. Me personally, do I main any of these? I don't main any of them, but I do play a lot of Susano, I play a lot of Tyr, I play a decent amount of Kali, a decent amount of Janus. And there's definitely some up there, especially the likely toxic, you know, Erlang, Hercules, Thor, King Arthur. I play a lot of these characters. Do I indulge in a bit of it sometimes? Occasionally, especially against my enemies with emote spam. And then do I play any of the ones down here? Not particularly. I play a bit of Fafnir. I play a lot of Baron, actually. I play a lot of Baron. Do you think my divinations here are accurate about you or are accurate about the player base of your god in general? Let me know, and I'll catch you guys for another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.